Hi everyone and welcome, this is the Apostate Prophet. Last week I posted my episode 43 Scientific Mistakes in the Quran. Since then, it has been flooded by people who somehow found it offensive. One of the points raised by my Muslim visitors was that I took everything out of context. Never gets old. But one thing caught my attention, and that's what I want to talk about. I want to show you how Islamic scholars, apologists, and translators of the Quran shamelessly deceive people. And this video is especially important for Muslims to watch, because you will see that Islamic scholars do everything to misrepresent the Quran and corrupt the Quran, which they consider Allah's word, just to keep Islam from being wrong. If you're a Muslim, at the end of this video, your trust in both Islamic scholars and your holy book should be heavily shaken. If I went to a knowledgeable person today and said, "Isn't it amazing how the sun is a shining light and in the middle of it the moon is a light too?" That person would probably say, hold on. The moon is not a light, nor does it emit light. It just looks that way because the moon reflects light from the sun. I mean, you wouldn't call a building a light just because it reflects sunlight, right? Now, if I was honest, I would say, "Oh, I was wrong. Thanks for correcting me." If I was dishonest, I would say, "You're misrepresenting my words. When I say the moon is a light, I mean it's a reflected light. In my language, light means reflection." And that knowledgeable person would probably think, "What an idiot," and would leave. I can't blame him, I agree. If I talked that way, I would be considered an idiot and a butt. The same is the case with the Quran, but in the Quran's case, the author of the Quran, who is supposed to be Allah, made that false statement about the moon. And nowadays, Islamic scholars and apologists make those bad excuses that I would do if I was a bad person. I can't blame them, Allah usually doesn't speak to us. In my former video, I took a Quran verse, chapter 10, verse 5, and pointed out that the Quran calls the moon a light, when in reality, the moon is neither light nor does it emit light. It reflects light coming from the sun. And that's why it looks like this, while the sun looks like this. The moon itself is actually dark. Its surface just reflects a small amount of the light that comes from the sun. The all-knowing, almighty Allah, the supposed author of the Quran, would know that, right? Now, some of my Muslim guests accused me at this point of misrepresenting the Quran, of taking it out of context, or of using a wrong translation, just to make it suitable to my agenda. You can be as correct and honest as possible. You will always get those accusations, don't worry. In reality, it's not me who changes the Quran verse. Let's read the verse. "It is he who made the sun a shining light, and the moon a light, and determined for it phases, that you may know the number of years and account of time. Allah has not created this except in truth. He details the signs for a people who know." Chapter 10, verse 5. The original Arabic text simply says that Allah made the sun a lamp, a shining light. No objection to that, although the Quran never reveals the true nature of the sun. But then it calls the moon a nur. Nur means simply light. The reason the Quran uses shining light for the sun and nur, light, for the moon is obvious. The sun looks like this and the moon looks like this. Let's look at regular, old, classic translations of this verse. As you can see, the classic translations accurately translate that part of this verse, in which the sun is a shining light, a shining object, and the moon is a light. These translations are still honest, because back then we didn't care much about reality and science, and there weren't many critics of Islam who pointed out flaws in the Quran. But now let's come to a more modern translation. It is the first English Quran translation that you find when you Google Quran, or when you search for a Quran verse. Sahih International, currently the most widespread Quran translation online. "It is he who made the sun a shining light, and the moon a derived light, and determined for it phases." Whoa, do you see that? It says derived light, or a reflected light. Although it doesn't say such a thing in the original verse, it just says nur, and the word nur means simply light. In the Arabic text, it only calls the moon a light. The same thing can even be found in another verse, chapter 71, verse 16. Again, the Quran calls the moon a light, but the Sahih International Translation adds its own words to the verse and calls it a reflected light or a derived light. This is not even in brackets or anything, it's directly inserted in the verse and changes the Quran. Isn't this a corruption of the Quran? Can you imagine the outrage if other people, if non-Muslims, changed the Quran like this based on their own interpretations and wills? Islamic scholars are corrupting the Quran. And they are not the only ones. If you Google Quran, moon, light, you will see a lot of Islamic websites that try to create the same lies and deceptions for the sake of saving their faith. Others even go to such extents that they call their own addition to the Quran a miracle, because the Quran supposedly showed us that the moon has a derived light, or a reflected light, before we knew it scientifically. Even Zakir Naik did that. Zakir Naik made multiple speeches in which he said that it is a miracle because the Quran tells us that the moon is a reflected light. The Quran doesn't say that. You say that. As usual, Zakir Naik's general audience buys that. They buy everything that he says. The crowd would clap if Zakir Naik puked, which he basically does here. On Quora, you can see how many people buy this deception and explain that the Quran describes the moon accurately. All of them use a corrupted translation. Now, some apologists even try to argue that the word nur, which is used here, could mean reflected light, or also means reflected light, or receiving light. But that's complete nonsense. Every dictionary will tell you, nur means light. That is also evident in Quran chapter 33 verse 46, where the Quran calls Muhammad an illuminating lamp, or a lamp that spreads light. Siraj means lamp and light means nur. Did the Quran make a linguistic mistake here? Furthermore, and this is a very heavy blow, the Quran also contains a verse, chapter 24 verse 35, that is prominently known as the verse of light. It begins with, Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. The original text, the Arabic, uses the exact same word for Allah as it uses for the moon, which is nur. Now, going by the logic of Sahih International and modern apologists, can I change this Quran verse and call Allah a reflected light or a derived light? Does that mean Allah is a reflection, a product of something, a creation? Allah is the reflected light of the heavens and the earth. Doesn't this verse look beautiful now? See how I could do the same for my agenda? What would Muslims call me if I did that? I would receive the usual responses: insults, accusations, threats. Why is it okay when Islamic scholars corrupt the Quran for their own agenda, but it's wrong when others do it? The Quran verse even further describes this light and how it makes everything bright, so there is really no excuse left. Nur means light. The Quran calls Allah Nur, the Quran calls the moon Nur. In both cases it simply means light, and that's wrong. The Quran is scientifically viewed objectively wrong. Adding words in order to make the Quran look correct is a corruption. And Islamic apologists and scholars who create these corruptions are liars. This is how they want to defend Islam with deceptions. This is how they want to deceive Muslim believers. And this shows how fragile and how outdated and a human product Islam is. Islam needs Muslims, but Muslims at a higher rate, more and more, are breaking free. Because who would like to believe in such a factually wrong, nonsensical text? As you can see, it's not me who changes the Quran, takes verses out of their contexts, and tries to manipulate people. It is them. Don't trust them. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your life. Use your mind. You are smarter than Islam. And when you feel ready, join us in taking apart this superstition, so we can focus on living our lives and creating better lives. Thanks for watching. Stay away from Islam.